Okay, so we talked about the mission of Ocean, and so how would you describe the core values of the project?
Yeah, so it's very much sort of correlated with the core values of crypto and blockchain, and interestingly, the core values sort of growing up in rural Saskatchewan too. So this comes around the idea of equalize the opportunity for everyone, even if the outcome might be unequal. That's kind of the heart of it, right? So this kind of reconciles the ideas of cooperatives and universal healthcare, all that, with the idea of capitalism. And that that allows then for incentives for people to build businesses on top, as well as at the same time a level playing field for doing this. So that's kind of sort of maybe the heart of it. But then other sort of values around this are permissionless. You shouldn't have to ask someone permission to be able to use this. There shouldn't be any gatekeepers. It really has to be a ubiquitous substrate for the world, for civilization, and to do that you need to be decentralized. No single point of failure. So everywhere along the stack, it can't be any single point of failure, whether it's at the level of the software, the hardware, various levels of the software. Immutability as well. This is, I guess, a characteristic, but it points to the ideals as well, such that when a claim is made, it's there for good. So I guess these are kind of partly characteristics of blockchain, partly values, but at the end of the day, it's not trying to imbue too strong of characteristics on this thing to have tools that are useful for everyone, but at the same time do have a bias towards sort of future civilization, future of humanity, etc. So a bias for good, and as technologists, when you build a technology, that technology can't help but have an opinion. So, in a sense, it's neutral where possible, and when or biasing towards a long-term positive good for humanity. So yeah, that's the summary.
So in 10 years, in the ideal world,
Yeah.
What has changed when Ocean is adopted?
What has changed overall? There is a level playing field for people.
Specific.
Yes, sounds good. So your data is sitting in decentralized substrates, and Ocean isn't focusing on the decentralized storage substrate itself, right? This is up to the Filecoins and our roots of the world. But one level above that, the ability to access that is also via a decentralized substrate like Ocean. Right now you have access control via things like Google Drive and so on, but instead of having Google Drive, the centralized entity, it's via Ocean, a decentralized entity that way. So that's sort of a very technological thing, but then going one level up, one level up, one level up. Imagine all the different apps that you use, whether it's web-based email, or whether it's photo sharing or otherwise. All of these apps themselves are not owned or controlled by any given corporation. Maybe there's some last mile that is very, very thin. That might be some centralized entity, corporation or otherwise. But all the permissions, all the information about it, all the metadata is simply controlled by you, the individual, right? Or in some cases it makes sense to have collective bargaining, where there's a group of 10 or 100 or 1,000,000 individuals, where you've joined this collective bargaining thing, call it a co-op, call it a union, call it a DAO, whatever. And this is part of that future too. So at the heart of it, you get to choose how your data is used in any given context. And then this includes sometimes sharing pieces of data for free. In other cases, it means selling it, either directly or via collective bargaining, etc., and making money. So ideally, you're making money from this data personally, but also you have way more opportunities to make money in other ways. So for just to expand upon this beyond just retail, beyond just consumers, where it's really easy as a data scientist to make money from a new algorithm that you invented. As a startup, where you don't have to go and get all these partnerships to get data, you can just start accessing the data with fair rights, etc. So this is kind of the future, and ultimately that's sort of the build it up very quickly. It's avoiding the tear it down, avoiding the negatives, which is sort of this top-down surveillance state where a handful of super powerful corporations or government entities control everything. So instead, it's much more about sovereign control of the data itself by individuals and larger groups.
So how could Ocean end up differently and more negatively than you currently hope for?
That's a great question. So overall, we are building tools that are permissionless, right? So, by design, we can't control how those tools are used. We try to bias towards the positive. So we try to make sure the first 10 or 20 use cases are positive. But there's almost certainly going to be entities who use this for the negative. So think about, the internet protocols, TCP/IP. Think about the web protocols that sit on top. Those are used for the positive, right? For people to share information, to talk with your grandmother across oceans, to help organize a protest, to build a business, all of that. That's all really positive. But there are negatives uses of that technology now as well, right? Things like financing terrorism, for example, or other criminals use the internet too. Is the point, right? And the internet itself is by definition permissionless, right? Routers don't care what a packet is, or try not to, right? And same thing with the web protocols. So taking that, now the difference from web protocols and the internet compared to what Ocean is Ocean is built on blockchain, which means it's decentralized like internet and web, but it also has state. So a state in the sense of storing information about stuff. And but otherwise, there's kind of no reason that these technologies shouldn't be treated like technologies of the past, right? So, and used that way. So lots of positive use cases, but the criminals and others are going to come in and use it as well. So, and you might say, okay, well maybe there's some nation states that I don't like, and I can try to stop, but that's not my place, right? So, I live in Western Europe. Do I want to make this available to China? Well, that's not for me to say, right? Western Europe will maybe not want that, but it's not. Overall, Ocean itself should not be set up like that, or vice versa, right? If I'm in China, do I want to prevent Western Europe or USA from using something? So that's not Ocean's place to say, right? Overall, it's really, really critical that Ocean remains permissionless, decentralized, immutable. Those three core characteristics of blockchain. So it's going to be used for good and for bad. All the traditional criminal activities, people will almost certainly have Ocean as this layer on top of the web protocols to use to benefit them too. But like any technology, hopefully the positive outweighs the negative.
How do you want the team to carry out the vision that you've kind of laid out for Ocean?
Well, largely, it's up to you, right? I think, first of all, to be bought into the vision on your own terms, right? So to understand, the why we are here, why we're doing it, why we're waking up and doing this at any given day. And then to take this and run with it in the sense of, how do we get to ubiquity, right? How do we sort of change the world? And the path to get to ubiquity is growth over a sustained period of time, right? Facebook was growing up to 40% a month for months and months, years and years on end, until it eventually got to 3 billion people in the world. Facebook became ubiquitous by sustained growth over a long period of time. This is how Ocean gets to ubiquity as well, sustained growth over a long period of time. So then the question is, okay, how do we grow? And right now, Ocean has some level of traction, but not amazing yet. So how do we get from that 0 to 1 with really awesome product market fit across one or several products? So we crack the 0 to 1 well, and we ask the hard questions, and we're honest with ourselves about where we are and where we can be. And we just basically, it's sort of all hands on deck for cracking the 0 to 1 well. And then at the same time, as we shift from the 0 to 1 to the 1 to n, the scaling up, then the problems, the nature of the problems changes a bit, and we do that. And cracking 0 to 1 and 1 to n, cracking 0 to 1 is a bit different than a traditional startup, where we're kind of like a platform but decentralized, right? So a protocol is kind of like a decentralized platform. At platform, as a single startup, you can go for just one customer, one product, and that's okay. And we could do that too. But at the same time, we already have a bunch of teams building on Ocean. That have really great hypotheses about how to get really great traction, and some of them are starting to get some pretty nice traction too. So how do we support them? So overall, it's all about as a team cracking the 0 to 1 problem, ideally across several different use cases. 1 use case, 3 use cases, 5, whatever it is, supporting some of the other teams out there, and then taking that to scale and then growing. So, but it all comes down to, when you wake up in the morning, why are you here? And then, taking it in your own terms to, change the world. Ultimately, it's really corny, but it really is about changing the world. But there's another way to put this too. I have kids aged 8, 10, and 10, and I want them to live in a world when they're 30 years old, 50 years old, 70 years old, where that world isn't some crazy top-down dystopia of surveillance, And so what can we do to help prevent that? And Ocean can make a big difference there.
So we're going to take probably 3 or 4 questions about the mission and values that you might have that Trent may not have answered. So is there anybody who has a question about Ocean, or also even a disagreement about the core values, or more of a clarification? Jamie,
What problem are we solving?
what problem are we solving?
That is a great question. Ultimately, the macro level problem is how do we ensure that the playing field around data and AI stays level, right? And that's a very vague general thing, but it breaks down into several subproblems and several subdomains, right? For example, if you're a data scientist, how do you get, how can you get access to data without having to join Google or Facebook to get access to that data, right? And we're even seeing this playing out right now, right? We saw last week that Getty Images sued Stability, the guys building Stable Diffusion, saying, hey, you're training data on images that we have copyright over. So we don't like that, we're gonna stop you, right? And then how does Stability get around this? Well, they just got, I don't know, I think $100 million funding, so maybe that will help, or maybe, so they have to sign some licensing deal. ChatGPT, the OpenAI with Microsoft, they can go and do the licenses with Getty, but where does that leave the individual data scientist? Where does that leave the individual startup that doesn't have $100 million or $1 billion? It's no longer a level playing field. So this is a very specific subproblem of the world of data scientists, the world of startups. How do you help maintain or improve and make a level playing field around data and AI with the changes that are happening, right? So that's a very specific subproblem, but then also points to a very specific set of customers. But it's different too, there's other subproblems too. How do we avoid, Facebook dominance continuing, having more power than many national governments, Zuck having more power, et cetera, right? What can we do about that to help soften that power over time? So there's a bunch of different subproblems. We shouldn't try to solve all the subproblems at once. We need to solve 1 or 2 or 3 subproblems well to get really great traction in that, and then build from that, right? The good news is, we haven't constrained ourselves to any given one vertical for sure, but we can, in order to take treat as a hypothesis, swing that back, see how we do, right? Against 1 or 2 or 3 hypotheses. So we have that flexibility here in this room, in the planning in the next few days and in the next few months, to choose where is it that we want to aim for now, for the next 3 months, 6 months, and then see how we do.
Next question, Andrea.
Related to the problem, is there enough awareness around the problem, or should we invest resources into amplifying the message?
So is there enough awareness around the problem, and should we focus more on amplifying to the world that there is a problem?
Yeah. So there's a bunch of different ways to go about this. I'm not going to advocate for one method or another, but generally, if you're a startup, whether it's Web 1, Web 2, or Web 3, you don't generally need to have mass audience knowledge in order to win a market, right? You just have to serve that market really well, and word of mouth, organic growth will be the thing that drives it. So if you have a product that is truly useful to a group of people, they will tell their friends about it, and those friends will try it out, and they will tell their friends. And so you want to make it where for every person who learns about the product and tries it, they tell on average more than 1 people. That's what gives you virality. That's what gives you growth. And organic growth is far more powerful than any top-down mass marketing appeal, right? You can, to help catalyze it, then once you've got product market fit, you can say, okay, how do we pour gasoline on the flames? And then you can start to spend more money on marketing, more broad and so on, maybe more marketing within that niche, more broad beyond. But generally, it's very inefficient if you try to have mass appeal, try to have mass audiences, when you're really trying to solve just a very specific customer problem to start with, right? So I generally advocate, focus on the narrowest thing that you need to in order to solve the problem, knowing that the thing can generalize as you go. But start with, organic growth, and then pour marketing money once you have the flames.
Mission and values. Any other things that you wonder about it? Anna.
What do you think is the biggest difficulty to actually have mass adoption?
What is the biggest difficulty to get mass adoption?
Well, actually, the biggest difficulty, if you try for mass adoption straight out, you'll fail because you haven't solved any problems, right? And so I think actually a challenge that Web3 projects have, especially ones from the era of Ocean 2016, 2017, 2018, where it's ICOs and so on, when they did the ICO, they had to have a white paper, they had to have some sort of general mass appeal such that the retail investors would invest. And then they had to keep maintaining that over time, a lot of that marketing message, whereas traditionally, pre-web and Web 1, Web 2 startups could focus on their narrow niche without trying to have the mass appeal to start with. So, Ocean has had to use up, 1/4 plus of its resources any given year on sort of the broad appeal marketing, where it doesn't really help for the day-to-day traction. It's just been sort of a bit of a drag. That said, we do have token holders and we want to help, keep them happy and stuff too, right? So we do have to acknowledge them. But that doesn't usually translate much to this organic bottom-up growth, right? So that's a challenge basically to make sure that we don't confuse, like basically to ensure that we focus on that 0 to 1, that organic growth from the bottom up, and not get distracted by trying to do too much, too broad, too generally and stuff, right? So I think that's a key challenge. And overall, I mean, the central challenge we have is how do we get traction where there is organic growth, right? In one place, get that 0 to 1. Once we have it in one place, we can pour gasoline on those flames.
Christian.
So solving all the problems for Ocean, you see kind of more of the problems like individuals can't access their data, like that playing field, versus like startups and small businesses that also can. You see those as being kind of the same problem or different sub-problems? Like which one do you kind of see Ocean facing the shorter term versus kind of being able to fit more of that household versus or the complementary?
That's a great question. So I see that actually Ocean can serve, ultimately, eventually, Ocean can serve all levels: individuals, small groups of people, whether it's families or small NGOs or small startups, then larger and larger organizations, larger NGOs, larger startups, enterprises, cities, nation states, and multi-nation states, right, with consortiums and stuff. So at the very top, you have things like GaiaX. At the level of enterprise, you have things like Daimler. At the level of individuals, it's just individuals' data, but typically, an individual will typically never ever be bothered to try to sell their data individually. It's just not worth the effort. So that's where collective bargaining comes in, right? So you join a co-op where there's 1,000 or 10,000 people that have joined this thing, and there's probably some full-time people in that co-op, 5 people or 50 people, working to find customers for your data in aggregate. That's privacy preserving, right? And co-ops are a common thing, right? I grew up in Saskatchewan, Canada, on a farm where you're a farmer, you're growing wheat. Are you going to go and sell your wheat directly to Japan? No, you join a co-op. So in Saskatchewan, there's something called the Saskatchewan Wheat Pool, a co-op of 75,000 farmers. And so every farmer basically in Saskatchewan joined that co-op. And then the Saskatchewan Wheat Pool had about 3,000 employees, including a CEO and all that, and also democratic representation, blah, blah, blah. But all the farmer had to do then was take the wheat to that grain elevator nearby, 10 miles away, and then the wheat pool, the Saskatchewan Wheat Pool, would take care of the rest. They would do the distribution of the grain, ship it to Japan or to Toronto or whatever, do the marketing, whatever, right? And so this is the case with most individual data. Individuals can't be bothered, but there is great opportunity there for data DAOs, whether they're shaped like co-ops or unions or otherwise, right? So where will traction hit the most? I don't know, right? I don't know if it will be for individuals or for DAOs or for enterprises. I think we want to have hypotheses of these and ask which are the best bang for the buck hypotheses to chase next, right? That's the question. So I think with all of this, though, I do see that data scientists themselves, what does a data scientist do? They are taking in data and applying AI tools, AI algorithms, to create value from that data, right? So generally AI is this process that is taking data and creating value from it, then to make predictions upon which you have actions, right? The data value creation loop. So in a lot of these use cases, there's going to be data scientists directly in that loop. So having a key realization that a lot of use cases is about data scientists, whether it's serving the data scientists directly or within the form of an app, an app that does collective bargaining. You could have, for example, of an app, a phone that is sort of like Apple Health, but it's an Apple Health where you toggle a button, you say join this health DAO, and now you're in a health DAO that has 10,000 or 10 million people, and you toggle another button that says, get my health insurance through this health DAO, and it knows more about you because you walk 10,000 steps a day or whatever, so you can get lower premiums, for example, right? But in that case, it's not directly targeting data scientists, it's for a consumer, right? So lots of these things, all it comes down to is a specific startup that's really going for it for one particular use case. But you can also go for data scientists directly, a data scientist doing DeFi trading. That's a DeFi trader, that's a data scientist, or whatever, right? So there's, probably 100 interesting use cases, and you could rank them from, best bang for the buck for us to chase versus otherwise, right? As well as, farming out to others in our ecosystem to go for. There's at least 10 startups out there in our ecosystem that are doing really cool things.
Roberto.
Maybe you just answered this, but Jamie asked, what problem are we solving? And he said, data scientists not relying on Google, having to go over there for their data. We now have a lot of on-chain data. We have data from Let's Protocol or DEXs and Arweave. And then perhaps on the other side of the spectrum, as you described, we have the data that we generate and the data that we could potentially own and share and own together in a cooperative. Can you just perhaps traverse that spectrum and just discuss with one example a little bit where we can
Yeah.
fit in?
Yeah, so overall, we're not solving the problem. The most, Jamie's question, what problem we're solving, I answered partly where it was, there's a lot of potential problems to solve, and I gave one example, right? Another way of framing it is, what is it that the Ocean tech stack does at the heart of it, right? And this will help to answer your question. At the heart of it, it's access control, right? So at the in the compute stack, at the lowest levels, you've got the OS, and sort of one right above that, you've got storage, physical storage of bits, and you've got compute, right? And then side by side with that, you have communication actually, right? So those are the three pillars of computing, right? Storage, communication, bandwidth, right? Or communication, sorry, storage, computation, communication. And those three things can get assembled together in many ways. And I see that Ocean is one layer up that is access control for the storage, yes and no, and for the computation, yes and no, right? And even compute data itself, even though we frame it as compute data for the sort of privacy preserving thing, it really is actually a pipeline, a data pipeline stack, right? So you can view Ocean as, and it's Web 3-ish. It's not fully Web 3 components, but you can mix and match. The storage, you can have Web 2 or Web 3. The compute, right now, it's mostly Web 2, but at some point we'll have Web 3. And then, for access control, right now we use provider, but you could also have decentralized ways to do public cryptography with threshold cryptography, et cetera, right? The protocol, all that. So at the heart, you've got access control and making that really easy to use at the level of developers with OceanPy, OceanJS, and then with apps on top, right? So there's what we realized, 3 years ago at least, we realized app number 0, no matter what, needs to be a data market as sort of the stake in the ground of a place where you can buy and sell data. But we also knew, we recognized then, that it probably wouldn't take off on its own. Maybe it would. If we got lucky, it would, and it didn't, but we thought maybe it would. But we knew that we needed to have other apps to do specific things, right? By going tokenized and stuff with the ERC20, then that means that we could leverage all of these awesome existing apps out there. Trezor becomes a hardware wallet, MetaMask becomes a regular wallet. And a data wallet is for, custody of data as well as transfer of control of the data, right? So that's really powerful. And then DEXs become data DEXs, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. DAOs become data DAOs. So all this awesome stuff that's been built in Web3 and crypto, whether it's wallets, DEXs, DAO technology, et cetera, we get to leverage all of that without having to rebuild it. So we've actually managed to build the infrastructure of a data economy by hijacking all of this existing crypto infrastructure, so we don't have to build it. Because before we did that, before we did Ocean V3, we were like, oh my God, we've got so much to build, right? Like, how do we build a data wallet and a data DEX and a data DAO? Like, it was daunting. And then we figured out this ninja trick to basically slide in and say, just tokenize it, right? So overall, at the heart, there's this access control stack and tokenizing it that allows us to leverage all these apps on top, or protocols on top, DEXs, et cetera. But besides that, there's going to be other apps for the last mile users, right? There's going to be some around trading. There's going to be some around, health insurance, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? And we don't know what those look like. There's quite a few different ways to slice and dice. One is definitely all the stuff we have today. If you look on your phone, I pull up my phone and I look at my phone and I see, okay, what do I have on my phone for apps? I've got Gmail. Okay, well, it makes sense that there's decentralized email, and there's some really great decentralized email protocols out there already. But email itself is decentralized. It's really about the last mile, right? So how do you do a good job there? Ocean itself is super well suited to that, because at the heart, email is simply messages with access control too, right? all the messaging apps you have, whether it's Skype or WhatsApp, every single one of those could actually be implemented with Ocean 2, with the different flavors, right? And health, all these things, right? So all these different existing Web 2 apps could be, they leverage data in some ways, they could be done Web 3, but then you can have Web 3 native things. And that's, I think, where the most exciting things come. Things like AI DAOs, where you have, self-owning AIs as economic agents, etc. So I guess I've rambled a bit on your question, but the summary is, in the stack, Ocean is about access control at the very, very heart. And then we are doing things to help remove friction for that last mile. And the most important thing we can do for removing friction is helping people to make money, right? Because if you can help people to make money, then they'll start making money and they'll start making more of it and they'll iterate, and the rest will go. But not always. Like, if Facebook grew, even though it wasn't helping people make money, it was mostly helping university students to hook up to start with, right? The poke button, all that, right? But that's also really useful on its own. So you can ask yourself, what can we do for helping catalyze dApps on top as well? So I'll stop.